cars.
You mentioned Adam's fascination with cars, which I think we covered. He, from what I gathered, what was his feelings about his commercial success with the Adams family? Did he like that, or did he get sick of it, or did he? And what were his feelings about his popularity in regards to that?
The only thing I can tell you about it that suddenly comes to my mind is that for a short while, the Herald Tribune, a paper that is no longer alive, printed a series that would appear once a week, I think, of the Adams family. And once they did that, and it was only for a short run, he would do them just for that, for that paper. Then the New Yorker didn't want to do it anymore, so that of course made him a little less happy. He didn't. I guess maybe he didn't consult them, or maybe they didn't. But once this happens with the New Yorker, is that way. I remember there's a man named Otto Soglo, is that a name? Who was a great artist and a great cartoonist, very funny, broad little things. And he had a series called The Little King, and eventually that was a comic strip called The Little King. And then he never sold another Little King to the New Yorker, and I guess you just can't have both. And I don't know what Soglo's feelings about it was, but it sometimes made Adams a little unhappy about it, but he's had lots of ideas on other subjects that were similar without actually using the family.
You were apparently one of the last people to meet Adams.
Well, he and I got to be very friendly. We would have lunch. He was a member of the Coffee House and the Century too. He would. We would always have lunch. Sometimes he would be in his office working, and it was lunchtime, and I was supposed to come into his office and say, "Let's go." And I remember he was crouched over his drawing board. And I said, "Oh, Charlie, I'll be back. Finish what you're doing, and I'm waiting for you." No, come in. I'll be through in a minute." So then I come in, I cut around and bent down to see what the hell he was drawing so intently. He was cutting the alligator off of an Acosta shirt. Is that the name of those shirts that have alligators? You can't stand the goddamn walking around with someone else's trademark and not getting paid for it. So that's one of the things about Adams. And and then he would like to go up and buy a couple of cigars. I never smoked cigars very much, but just the pleasure of him buying a cigar and giving me the one, and we'd light up a cigar after lunch, and he was a good company, and really nice. And his apartment, he had an apartment right near the Museum of Modern Art, and it was a penthouse apartment, or 2 floors. And his coffee table was an old embalming table. And he had a full-scale armor suit standing there, with a whole visor and everything. And he had a whole wall full of crossbows, which was very, very beautiful. These are all parts of his hobbies. And then he had anatomical porcelain or glazed something of a human body, showing the intestines and everything else. And lots of things, because people would give him things. People would go to an antique shop looking for maybe a chair, and they say, "Oh, this would be great for Charles Adams." And his place was just full of little stuffed snakes or ceramic snakes, or an anatomical picture of an eye, or sculpture from an ophthalmologist, and things like that. Yeah. So but he enjoyed all those things, and he liked playing the whole act, and enjoyed people who enjoyed it. But one thing, if I may go on, the only time I ever saw Charles Adams pissed off or angry or incensed, and then, like my father's oxygenic indication that something was going to happen, I never saw him explode, but I just saw him tense up. Looked like if we don't change the subject, he's going to kill or be angry. I was with him at Elaine's, and he had, I can't remember the whole party, but there was a little girl there at the table, maybe my date, I can't remember, who was fascinated with him and kept asking him questions about how he thinks of these ideas and all the, which he found very intrusive. And I tried to dissuade her. She wouldn't be stopped. And he looked like he was going to great. Because one thing about Charles Adams, I learned that he did not like to go off automatic. There's a whole theory that I have, we have discussed it, you know. In sex and drawing and painting and any art and writing, it's best to let it just flow. Don't start examining it too much and get off automatic. It just screws up the works. And he didn't like to talk about, you know, this girl was evidently into psychology or psychiatry and was asking all these questions which he found very intrusive. And he didn't want to think about it, you know, because I think he felt he's got a good thing going. He doesn't want to complicate his life by thinking about what he's thinking, which is a dangerous thing in life. Best to just talk and edit it later.
And you saw him last day of your...
Oh, good. Well, Charles Adams was very excited. In fact, he helped me many times when I was looking for a house in the country, and I was looking for. I didn't like living in that small house with this young lady I was interested in. I had to find my own place, and I found another place I liked. And he wanted to come out to see it. He was very interested in buildings and houses, and he studied architecture. He's very interested in architecture, by the way. If you look at his drawings, you can see pieces of architecture that other cartoonists don't really bother with looking at, you know. He sees it all. And he dissuaded me from buying a house that I'm glad he did. And he said, "You'll be so lonely out here. It's in the woods, and no, don't do it." Although it was a beautiful house. And he was right, because being a city person and gregarious, I always measured real estate for me, as a place where I would not want to have to worry to death that I forgot the milk and would have to go 4 miles back to get the milk after doing all my shopping, and that was the sort of place. So so we were quite close, and he never did get to see the house that I finally did buy, but he kept saying, "We got to go out there sometime." So finally he said a date, that day, you and I will go out. And I wanted to take a train or which was very easy. He wanted to take his car. He had an Audi that he loved. And his wife hated it, because that was when Audi was being sued by some woman, wrongly, I think, who I think her heel caught in the brake thing or something. And so the wife wouldn't even drive with him in that car. So anyway, so we went out there, and he was interested in baseball, something that never fascinated me except in the World Series. And we watched baseball, and we went to dinner, and we called him Jim Stevenson, who lived not far from where I live, and we all went to dinner together, and we came back and smoked a cigar, and then he went to bed, and he said he's going to leave in the morning. So in the morning we got up, and I made some coffee for him, and he said goodbye in the car, and then I got a call from a mutual friend of ours who said that he was found dead in the car in front of his house on 54th Street. He had a heart attack. So that was a great blow to me, of course, and everybody. Then they had a great big memorial party at the library for him, which was fantastic, and I remember that it's a shame Charlie's not here. He would love this, because he was a very great party man. He couldn't drink anymore because he had diabetes, and he was advised not to drink, and he missed that, you know. For me, a drink never makes me any brighter. I usually just go downhill after a couple of drinks. But it was very important to him, and he never seemed to enjoy himself as much just drinking ginger ale. So he said. But he was a lovely man, and I never knew anybody who didn't love him and respect him and find him amusing. And he had a great sense of humor. And for instance, he was walking down the street with Sidney Offutt, who was a friend of ours, and Jim. I wasn't there this day. I heard about this. And they passed a guy on Fifth Avenue with a great big sign that the world is coming to an end. And I have to say that Charles Adams tells all his humor with a straight face. Unfortunately, I can never keep a straight face when I'm telling you about it. But he just, there's a long pause, and he leaned over to offer. He goes, do you think we should tell Frank? Another time, I was very excited. I'm very impressed with people who have talent and do French, I think. Do something. And there was a man who came over from Denmark that I later went to Denmark and got to know. His name is Pete Hine, and he's pretty well known. He has little books put out, and I forget what he calls the damn things, but they're all little poems, but witty little funny things, not poems. Verse, and he also was on the Atomic Energy Committee, and he designed furniture, and he also sent cartoons into the New Yorker, and so he was in the New Yorker, and I, being, I was just about to tell you that this Pete Hine was a very impressive guy. I thought he was a terrific little guy, and I became friendly with him because I was in charge of entertaining some of the visiting firemen from other countries, because Jim didn't have time for him. And I was very impressed because he was, as I said, the head not the head, but part of the Atomic Energy Committee for representing Denmark. He was a designer of Scandinavian furniture, and he wrote funny little books, and he had a daily column in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, he had records of his work in there. He was a fascinating little guy. As you can tell from me talking about him, I was very impressed with the guy. I mean, I would love to be a Renaissance man that could do all those things, I guess. And so I went into Charles' office. I said, I met this guy. He's absolutely fantastic. He does the Atomic Energy Committee. He does cartoons for this. He does these books. He does this. And Charles just looks at me, not impressed at all. He says, Jesus Christ, this guy should be tied up. That was his reaction. Was so different than mine, which gives you a pretty good idea, I think, of the feeling that you get from being in Charles Adams Company.
If we could talk a little bit in closing here with your memories of William Shawn and your experience, because of course those were the years that coincided most of the years.
Yes.
How and whether he worked with the artists as much as the writers, or was he just with the writers and all of that?
Well, he was a very...
Could you just say his name, if you would?
William Shawn was the editor, the editor after Ross, and a very considerate man, probably of everyone, but none more than he was of the writers. And I think of the cartoonists probably too. I couldn't measure, but I had a feeling the writers were his first love. He was a writer. And typically of his consideration, for instance, he called me up on the phone in my office saying that he wanted to talk to me about something. Good. And I said, oh, I'll be right up, Mr. Shawn. He said, no, I'll be coming down to see you. Which is, not what you'd expect in a Hollywood movie of an editor and a little flunky. The terrible thing for me was my office was such a mess, I wanted to go into his office. So he was on the 2 floors ahead of me, above me, so I was working like a son of a bitch to put things in order and pile up things and get the waste paper basket filled with the papers around the floor. And he came down. But that is how he always was. I mean, he had the greatest respect and said so, and everybody else said so repeatedly, that John, if you could draw for Shawn, I mean, for his magazine, or write for it, you were absolutely a prince or a king. He would do anything for you. He respected that. Didn't have much use if you weren't, evidently, or didn't have time for it, but always very, very much that, and a very nice man. And, but I didn't have an awful lot of experience with Shawn, unfortunately, in the office. It was not an office that you could just walk in and talk to without some real reason. Oh, you could, but I mean, we were always intimidated by the responsibility. After all, putting a weekly magazine out and reading everything and going through it is just a job. It's endless, you know. And the next week comes as fast before the last week is up. Only Sean, I think, could do that because I don't think delegation of duties was not one of his big talents. And it's always interesting. It was always Mr. Sean. I mean, there's only a few men, maybe Hamburger or somebody his age in the magazine as that. It was always Mr. Modell. He never took a liberty with me, and I dared not take it with him. It was always Mr. Sean. And one of the few times I did have the opportunity to be in at the art meeting, it was just by that time, Days Terry, the woman I told you about earlier, who was a head of all the secretaries there and whatnot, and she had died and gone off, and Lebrano had died. So it was only Garrity and him, actually. And Garrity was rather suspicious of anybody else being in there anyway. They would have lots of arguments. Garrity could very easily get upset with someone else. He did very well. Once when I was there with Garrity, they said, "And what do you think about this cover drawing?" I said, "Well, nothing except I mentioned one little spot where I thought was, when they reduced the drawing, it would become an interference with the face or something." And I mentioned it, and Garrity didn't like it too much. He said, "Fine, well, if you want to think so, you tell Schwan." So, I mean, it was a very strong proprietary feeling he had about this position, and I didn't ever speak too much again unless I thought it was very, very serious. But when Garrity wasn't there, it was my responsibility to take the drawings back and up to Sean and see what he thought about them and do that. And Sean was so courteous. I don't think that's a strong enough word. Let me tell you that I went in there and he got up and wanted me to sit down. I wanted him to sit down. It was like an old high school funny routine of Alphonse and something. Did you have things like that? Where each one was so... And I was trying to turn the drawings over, and he wanted to turn them over. He was being so nice to me. I would say something, and then he would listen very carefully. I mean, it was an awkward situation for me, and I didn't know what the hell to do. So the next week, I had the same thing to do again. And all week I was thinking, how am I going to take care of this? Because I didn't get to say anything. I was so intimidated by his forced intimidation of me that I had a feeling I should have said something about. I feel that my job had suffered some. I hadn't really been brazen enough in the company of this intimidated quietude to say, I think this drawing should be redone with something else. So the next week I decided I'm just going to go in there and be Frank Modell, good or bad. I can't play the Sean scene. And that was the only way. And I went in there, and it was great. He just was comfortable with it. As long as he thought I wasn't intimidated. He was intimidated by my intimidation, I guess. And so we became great. And then he put the drawings aside, and in effect, without cigarettes, lit a cigarette. He doesn't smoke, of course. But I mean, it was relaxed. And he asked me if I'd seen certain art shows in town. And I told him about somebody I liked, and he said, oh, he knows that art. He likes it very much. It was very easy going for both of us.
Did he ever make any specific comments on your own work that you remember?
Yes. He was very nice in a meeting in the elevator once. He had remarked that a drawing I had just sold that he had looked at, he liked very much. That was the only thing. I never spoke to him about it. But he gives you the feeling, which, by the way, has never been there since, that he loved your work. I mean, part of the whole motivation of me working so hard to do good drawings was that he loved my work. And even when he had the facility, that even when he rejected the drawing, which he did often, would convince me that it wasn't really as good as I usually do, but he still loves my work. You know, now it's such apathy. It's like putting a letter in the mailbox. There's no response. You're not sure it's going to get there. It's no fun at all. And I don't. For anything. I haven't talked to anybody at that magazine who does like the whole responses. No, certainly none of the people in the old days, but it was great fun. And everybody who knew Sean just loved him and would have done anything for him.
You mentioned that the atmosphere is so very different now. You feel it's corporate and all of that. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference?
Well, it's first of all, it's all design different, so it looks like you walk down the hall, you look like you're down looking for your stateroom on the ship. And I don't know, it's a whole different, there's a whole different cast of people there, a lot of young people there, who walking around thinking that they know the New Yorker. And we old timers said, you don't know the New Yorker. You know an outfit that bought the New Yorker's title. There's nothing about the New Yorker about it. I mean, I shouldn't say, there's nothing like it, like the feeling of the old days. I'm sure they have good articles. They do have good articles, and they have a new editor, and everybody said he's great, and I believe he is. But it's not the same. It's no fun. At least it's no fun for me anymore. And I've done enough cartoons, and my excitement now is to put my mind to other things and focus on other things that I'm doing, which is very exciting for me. Nothing, I mean, it's not anything that's showing any payback, except there's enough payback if I'm getting a kick out of doing it.
Well, that's great. It's wonderful. I very much appreciate it. You covered a lot of material. Do you have any interest in just making a sketch of any kind for the camera? Anything that you...
If it pleases you and the camera, I'll do it.
Yeah, if there's something during the course of...
A salesman.
During the course of it,
Yeah,
something
I think I should talk on this thing particularly, because years ago, I was asked to do a talk at Christmas time for for kids, entertaining. I did it for several years, and then I thought maybe I should do something a little more interesting than what I was doing to keep their attention. And I devised this way of doing an animated drawing without using anything else but paper. And it was something like this.
That's run out, Adam. Can you just pause for a second?
Anyway, I think I was just about to tell you that I got a patent for this thing, strangely enough. I had a friend who was a patent lawyer, and I said, it's a great idea, and he said, well, I'll try, but don't be offended if the patent office says it does not have the dignity of invention. Nothing ever came of it, but I thought it was funny. And sometimes it works. And the idea is we fold it like this. It's not quite working. Well. And then we can have a talking picture by just saying, hey, hey, hi. This is the end of the Modell part of this movie. You buying that? Sometimes it works a little better than that.
Just animate it once for me.
Okay, for animation. Yeah. Hey. I don't think this is the best example of my art, but But he's pretty good. He didn't work out so good.
Is that him?
Okay,
Yes.
am I
I'm gonna
free?
get one photograph of you.
Oh, yeah. But if it's
I think there are just a couple of other people I thought maybe you could recall. And one of them is Mr. Steinberg, Saul Steinberg.
Oh, Saul, yes. He's become a recluse in recent years. I don't know why, but we used to see him quite often. And he was a great friend of Sid Perlman's too, and of course a master draftsman, I think. I know he doesn't take his earlier work seriously now, but I think that was his best work. Those line drawings that he did were absolutely sensational. I mean, they were, I think, the best things of my time. Best drawings, yeah.
Did he have influence on your own work, do you think? Or?
No, not at all. No, completely different. Except I have great respect and regard for what he was striving at. His abstractions were marvelous. He's had a tremendous influence on young artists. No, he's had no influence on me, but on my work, I mean. I don't think, maybe. You know, you never know. It's certainly not, I'm not conscious of it.
Are there any New Yorker cartoonists that you feel had an influence on your own work?
Johnny Hell, probably. Because Johnny was the first, I think, to use the thin line, just pure line, you know, which I think he took from La Vie Parisienne, a publication in Paris. They were the first ones. But he had a wonderful sense of design and drawing. Not in the same degree that Steinberg is in another class, I think. His things are more abstract. Johnny's were literal. They had to be. But Saul's drawings, his abstractions, they're quite communicative. I mean, a drawing of a wall where somebody sat and left a shadow, you know, it's a literate idea, but it also lends itself for graphic design. His drawings of automobiles, his sense of architecture. He's, I think he's a graduate architect from Austria or somewhere. Even though he didn't pass the test for the Scenic Designers Union, and because Harold Arlen wanted him for a play, and he had a wonderful concept of this. It was to be a black and white, the whole thing, and just one spot of color. And it sounded marvelous for a Haitian thing that Harold was doing at the time. And he took the test for the screen designers. I mean, the scenic designers. It's also a part of the Paper Hangers Union, and he didn't pass the test, so he didn't get the assignment.
And Ralph Barton, was that somebody else you knew?
Barton was also a very gifted caricaturist, you know, and a great friend of Chaplin's. They were very friendly, he and Charlie Chaplin. Unfortunately, he did himself in Paris and left a wonderful note on his suicide. I don't know where I can find that. It must be around somewhere, printed somewhere, but I remember it as being a wonderful piece of literature.
You don't remember what it said, though, huh?
Well, I couldn't quote from it, no. But it had a lot to do with his ex-wife, Carlotta, who married O'Neill, Gene O'Neill.
Well, it seems like those caricature is not as popular as it used to be, certainly.
Oh, no, it's a lemming profession, actually. I mean, I don't encourage anybody to take it up, no. There's no need for it. I mean, it may come back into fashion. I don't know. It's very popular in South America for some odd reason. They love caricature down there, Mexico and even South America, Brazil and Uruguay and Argentina. There were some marvelous caricatures down there. Not great, but competent.
And Al Foy, is that how you pronounce it, or Foy?
Oh, he was first rate, Al Free, yeah. Yeah, also a New Yorker caricaturist who didn't like to do caricatures, I don't think. I think they had to coax him into doing one every now and then, but he was, I never met Al Free. Sid and I were going up to visit him on the week that he died. We just were about a week too late. Sid Perlman, was a great admirer of Free's, you know.
Oh, I think that's, you covered a lot of ground. I can't
Wonderful.
think of anything else. I very much appreciate it.
Okay, I hope
thank
it
you
works.
for taking time away from your work.
Well, I hope you get a sentence or two out of it.
Oh, sure. I want to take the, can we get through here?
Then is the tale of Sound Roll 2 of the Van Doren.
Well, I thought we could begin at the beginning, perhaps, and if you could recall when you first became aware of the New Yorker magazine. Did you see it on the newsstand, or did you hear about it?
Well, in the early 30s, I started collecting the magazine. You know, I was enchanted with the whole concept of the magazine, and I submitted drawings for years, but it was never accepted. It was turned down always. And then later, I designed a thing for the Life magazine. They asked me to do a thing on the beginning of the magazine. They had a 2 or 3 page thing, Life Goes to a Party or something like that. And they had an idea that maybe I could take some photographs that they would give me, and by adding a line or two, change the personality. And so I said, well, I don't know, I'll give it a fling, you know, send me the photographs. So they sent me the photos, and the first one I did was Mary Pickford. I put a little mustache on her, and she looked like Hitler. And they used it, oddly enough. And then I did one of Al Smith, and of Jimmy Durante, rather, and I put a cigar in his mouth, and he looked like Al Smith, very much so. And then I did one of Harold Ross, the editor of the New Yorker, who I didn't know, except by reputation. And he had that kind of cropped hair. It stood up straight, you know. And I put a huge mustache on him, and he looked like Stalin. And he was furious with that, and I probably hit a nerve or something, because he said, this fellow will never appear in the New Yorker. And that prevailed up until his death, really. I mean, I never appeared in the New Yorker, although all my friends were in there, you know. Knew everybody. That Sid Perlman and I had collaborated on a musical together. We went around the world together. Ogden Nash, a lot of the fellows that were contributing then were dear friends of mine. I could never set foot in that office until recent years.
Did Perlman ever invite you to the offices and show you around? Or?
No. No, I never set foot in the offices.
That's something.
To this day, I haven't set foot in them.
Well,
But that seems to be the history of my career, actually. It's the same thing with the Times. I didn't know anybody at the Times for 2 years when I first started, some 70-odd years ago. I used to deliver my drawings to the doorman at the Times, and that was it.
could you tell us a little bit about Perlman? Because that's one person we haven't had a chance to talk much about.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Whatever you can reflect on about him.
Well, he was, as you know, I mean, I thought he was the kind of the Picasso of literature. He had a way of distilling everything down into its pure essence, into 1 or 2 lines. From his early training when he was a cartoonist doing drawings for Judge. And the captions became longer and longer, and the editor said to him, "Why are you doing the drawing? Leave out the drawing and just continue the caption." And that's how I became a writer, actually. But he kept that visual image of simplicity and distilling it down to its pure essence up until the very end, really. His description, for instance, of consumers' research as unfrocked chemist, you can't improve on that. I mean, it's nails it. I don't know what I can tell you about him except what he obviously you gained from reading him.
When did you first meet him? What were the circumstances?
Well, this was early in the 20s in Paris. We became great friends then, and remained friends for all those years. We did a musical together. Unfortunately, we had to leave the country. It was so it folded in Philadelphia. But I don't know what I can tell you about Perlman that isn't quite obvious from his writings. He was a misanthropic fellow, as most comedians are, dour, creative beyond belief, and a stickler for the mot juste. He would worry about a word for days until he got the right one. Then he was a new man again, free, able to move around and talk and animate himself.
You also knew John Held, didn't you?
Oh, yes, yes.
If you could talk about him, perhaps.
Well, Johnny was also marvelous. I think that Johnny was more responsible for the flapper age than Fitzgerald. I mean, Johnny invented the flapper, really. The open galoshes, the pork pie hat, the mink coat, the graffiti on flivvers, on Fords, "Oh, you kid," and all that sort of stuff. That's all of Johnny's doing. The short skirts. He had a great effect on fashion. And as a matter of fact, when the long skirt came in, Johnny never appeared anymore because he couldn't get. They became cartoons. They lost all of their style, validity, and sense of line. When he put a long skirt on, they became ludicrous. It was that thing about looking up her skirts or something. I don't know, and their little socks and things. They were very erotic somehow. And they happened to hit a nerve in the reading public. And he had, of course, a strip in the Hearst papers and a great contributor to all of the publications. And when this happened, it's happened overnight. And Russell Patterson took all of the contracts that Johnny had because he could do a long skirt and achieve the same effect that Johnny could do with his flapper. But that whole flapper era is Johnny's, I think. He's absolutely the Gibson of that era,
If you could just mention John Held Jr., that's his name, right?
That's right.
But he was known as Johnny, right?
Well, yes. I mean, to his friends, he was, yes.
Now, John Held Jr. was also very close with Harold Ross from my research.
That's right, yes. He was one of the first contributors to the magazine, actually. I think there were a small band of fellows who got together to organize that at the very beginning.
Did you ever know Charles Baskerville?
No.
He was
No.
an early contributor there.
No, I knew Charlie Adams.
Could you talk a little bit about him and your memories of Charles Adams?
Well, he was a strange fellow, lovable fellow, really. Not a harmful bone in his body. And we used to have meetings, actually, at the Lobster on 46th Street. They unfortunately went out of business, but we used to meet there every Thursday for luncheon. And there was Charlie Adams, Phil, Brooks Atkinson, Sid Perlman, there was quite trying to think of his name now. Oh, well, there was a raft of fellows, really. It was a lovely Thursday meeting. And we tried to, when the Lobster went out of business, Harvey Arkin, who organized this thing, tried to get another restaurant. We tried other restaurants, you know, but it never worked. You can never reproduce these things, you know. It's like the Algonquin Round Table. When it's finished, it served its purpose, and that was it. And that's the end of it, you know. Might as well face it. They try to revive those things, but they're silly.
Now, Adams is apparently very different from the drawings that he did. His personality
Oh, yes.
was...
Yes, he was a very quiet, reserved fellow. His drawings were, of course, explosive and crazy, you know, but piercing, absolutely, yeah. He was a wonderful talent, I thought, for that magazine.
Well, apparently, William Shawn said that when Adams came, that's when the New Yorker really became the New Yorker. He said his contribution was unparalleled.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. What about Arno? Was Arno before?
Well, this is what Shawn said. But did you know Peter Arno as well?
Not very well, slightly, but not friendly with the way I was with Charlie. No, I never knew Peter.
Could you, if a viewer is hearing for the first time about Peter Arno's work, could you describe to them the quality of the drawing and the...
Well, he was very much influenced by, I think, by French illustrators. But there was another great illustrator for the New Yorker, and that was Galbraith, who seems to be completely forgotten. But he was a Mormon, wonderful draftsman. Well, strangely, Johnny Hill was a Mormon, and Hank, rather Young, Mahonry Young, they all came from Salt Lake City. I don't know, it's strange that they all descended into the New Yorker. It was Han Young and Johnny Hill and Galbraith, and Carl Burroughs, the art director, the art critic rather, for the Tribune, was also came from that. They all came down together. They were about the same age, all of them. They had a great contribution to humor, I think, which is sadly disappearing as we speak.
You had a chance, did you not? I need to reload. They're just going to change the roll. Do you have any interest in just making a sketch of any kind for the camera? Or anything that you...
If it pleases you and the camera, I'll do it.
Yeah, if there's something during the course of...
A salesman, and used to bring stationery. That was the gift for me when he would be out at the hotel, and I'd get this hotel, so I could draw all the time. But what?
Do you like this type of paper?
Yes.
Slate it?
Should I talk down?
Yeah, you can talk if you want during the course of the...
Yeah, I can